They were kings and conquerors, explorers and geniuses, the kind of names that shaped empires, painted masterpieces, and wrote symphonies that would echo forever. But none of that glory could protect them from one of the most humiliating, painful, and very human ends imaginable: death by dysentery, cholera, or typhoid. These are 13 famous figures, rulers, artists, and visionaries whose final moments came not on the battlefield or the stage, but in sickness and suffering caused by the very water they drank. Each of them lived larger than life and died in ways we can hardly believe today. Which of these tragic stories shocks you most? Tell us in the comments below. And if you've ever wondered how even the greatest could fall to something so small, this video is for you. Let's begin our journey with a man whose final notes still haunt the world and whose death remains one of history's great mysteries. Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, the musical genius who drank a single glass of water and never recovered.
Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, 1840 to 1893. It was November 1893 in St. Petersburg. The city was in mourning, and the world of music was silenced. Just 9 days after premiering his haunting Symphony No. 6, Pathetic, Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky lay dying, struck down, they said, by cholera after drinking a single glass of contaminated water. He was the soul of Russian music, the genius behind Swan Lake, The Nutcracker, and Romeo and Juliet. His melodies carried both elegance and deep sorrow, reflecting a man who battled anxiety, heartbreak, and secrets in an era that didn't forgive them. When the news spread, Russia wept. Crowds filled the streets. Orchestras around Europe played his works in candlelight vigils. Yet behind the grief, whispers began. Was it truly cholera or something darker? Some said Tchaikovsky was forced to take his own life to protect a scandal. Others believed it was fate, not conspiracy, that ended his final symphony. What do you believe? A tragic accident or a secret buried with him forever? Tell us your thoughts below. Because for the next story, we move from the concert hall to the battlefield, to a king who won immortal glory in war, but lost his life to a soldier's disease. King Henry V of England, the hero of Agincourt, undone by dysentery far from the throne.
King Henry V of England, 1386 to 87, 1422. It was August 1422. The young conqueror who once inspired Shakespeare's immortal line, "Once more unto the breach, dear friends," now lay in a lonely castle near Paris, burning with fever, weakened by dysentery. At just 35, King Henry V of England, hero of Agincourt, was dying, not from sword or spear, but from a soldier's disease spread through the filth of the camps he once commanded. Henry V had been the warrior king who united England under his banner and struck fear into France. His victory at Agincourt was legendary, a few thousand archers defeating an army 5 times their size. But power and pride could not shield him from the harsh truth of medieval war. No medicine, no sanitation, no escape from the stench and sickness that followed every campaign. When he died, England plunged into mourning and chaos. His infant son became Henry VI, too young to rule, too weak to hold the empire his father had built. In many ways, the king's own glory became the curse that shattered the dynasty. Even kings who conquered nations couldn't conquer disease. Can you imagine? The mightiest ruler of his age, brought down not by an enemy, but by dirty water. And from one great sailor of history to another fallen hero, our next story sails across the oceans, where another English legend faced his own final storm. Sir Francis Drake, the fearless explorer who circled the globe, only to be defeated by the sea and by dysentery.
Sir Francis Drake, c. 1540 to 1596. January 1596. The Caribbean sun was blazing, but on the deck of his ship, the Defiance, England's greatest seafarer lay dying. Sir Francis Drake, the man who had circled the globe, terrorized the Spanish Empire, and become a living legend, was struck down by dysentery during a failed expedition near Portobello, Panama. He was more than an explorer. He was a weapon of the crown. Knighted by Queen Elizabeth I, Drake raided Spanish fleets, stole gold across the Americas, and returned home as a hero and a pirate, depending on which flag you flew. But in his final voyage, the glory was gone. Disease spread among the crew, ships rotted in tropical heat, and the sea that once crowned him now turned against him. On his last day, Drake dressed in full armor, ready to meet death as a captain should. He was buried at sea, sealed in a lead coffin, and lowered into the waters he'd once ruled. Yet even the ocean could not wash away his legend. Centuries later, divers still search for his resting place, chasing the ghost of the man called El Drake. What do you think? Was Drake a hero or a pirate blessed by luck? Tell us in the comments. And now, we turn from the open sea to the shadows of rebellion, where another English ruler met his fate not on a battlefield, but in sickness and shame. King John of England, the monarch who gave us the Magna Carta and lost his life to dysentery in the middle of a civil war. King John of England, 1166 to 1216. It was October 1216. England was torn apart by rebellion, and its king, weary, hunted, and sick, rode desperately through the muddy fens of eastern England. Days later, at Newark Castle, King John, the infamous ruler who had signed the Magna Carta, collapsed with dysentery. Surrounded by monks and soldiers, the man once called John Lackland met his end in pain and humiliation. History remembers him as one of England's most unpopular monarchs. He lost Normandy to France, overtaxed his nobles, and ruled with cruelty and paranoia. But in death, irony followed him. The Magna Carta, forced upon him by angry barons, would later become one of the greatest symbols of liberty and law in the Western world. His reign ended in chaos. His body was buried in Worcester Cathedral, but his legacy lived on, not as a hero, but as a warning. Even his death seemed like divine justice to many of his subjects. What do you think? Was John a tyrant cursed by fate, or simply a flawed man born into the wrong moment? Share your thoughts below. From the cold castles of England, our story now travels east to the opulent palaces of India, where one of history's most powerful emperors met the same cruel fate. Emperor Akbar, the great ruler of the Mughal Empire, whose wisdom changed to civilization, before dysentery claimed his final days.
Emperor Akbar, 1542 to 1605. October 1605, in the grand palace of the Tepe Sikri, the mighty Emperor Akbar lay weak and feverish. The man who had built an empire of tolerance and power, who had ruled over millions, was dying of dysentery, the same illness that had felled kings and soldiers before him. Akbar the Great had reigned for nearly 50 years over the Mughal Empire, stretching across India. He was known for his brilliance, his reforms, and his bold experiments with religion, promoting peace among Hindus and Muslims alike. His court became a beacon of art, music, and philosophy. But even a visionary emperor was not beyond the reach of nature. When the infection struck, no physician could save him. His death marked the end of an age. The empire mourned as his son Jahangir ascended the throne. Akbar's dream of unity endured, yet his passing reminded the world of one timeless truth: power cannot buy health, and greatness cannot outlive the body that carries it.
Do you think a ruler like Akbar could exist today? One who ruled with both strength and compassion? Tell us what you think. And from the palaces of India, we return to the courts of England, to a king of intellect and intrigue, whose final illness ended an age of peace and poetry. King James I of England, 6th of Scotland, the scholar king who united two realms and fell to a sudden attack of dysentery.
King James I of England and 6th of Scotland, 1566 to 1625. It was the spring of 1625. The royal residence of Theobald Palace fell silent as courtiers whispered in dread. King James I of England and 6th of Scotland, the man who had united two crowns, was dying, struck by a sudden and violent attack of dysentery. He was a scholar more than a soldier, fluent in several languages, a poet, and a patron of learning. Under his reign came the creation of the King James Bible, one of the most influential books in human history. But his court was also clouded with intrigue. Rumors of favorites, political manipulation, and secret indulgences swirled around him. Some even whispered that his death was not illness, but poison, though history found no proof. As his health failed, James accepted his fate calmly, his mind still sharp. When he died, an era ended. The peaceful rule of the early Stuarts gave way to decades of conflict that would tear Britain apart. Isn't it haunting? A man whose words shaped faith for centuries, undone by the same sickness that plagued peasants and kings alike? Tell us your thoughts below. From royal chambers to imperial courts, our next story leads to a king beloved by his people, whose final days were marked by both illness and heartbreak. King Alfonso XII of Spain, a monarch of peace who brought hope to his country before dysentery claimed his young life.
King Alfonso XII of Spain, 1857 to 1885. November 1885, the Palace of El Pardo in Madrid was draped in black. At just 27 years old, King Alfonso XII of Spain, the monarch known as El Pacificador, the peacemaker, had died, struck down by dysentery, worsened by tuberculosis. He had restored the Spanish monarchy after years of chaos and civil war. Young, handsome, and determined, Alfonso became a symbol of hope for a divided nation. He rebuilt stability, encouraged education, and brought calm to a country exhausted by conflict. But behind the crown was a man battling constant illness and grief. His beloved queen, María de las Mercedes, had died only months after their wedding, a tragedy that haunted him for life. When Alfonso's final sickness came, Spain mourned as if losing a son. His death ended a fragile peace, but his legacy of reconciliation endured, carried on by his unborn son, Alfonso XIII, born months later. Can you imagine a nation pinning its hopes on a child yet to be born? That was Spain's reality the day their young king fell. Tell us what you think below. Now, from royal palaces, we journey to the White House, to meet a president who expanded a nation's borders only to be taken by one of history's deadliest epidemics. James K. Polk, the 11th President of the United States, whose triumphs ended with cholera's cruel touch.
James K. Polk, 1795 to 1849. It was the summer of 1849 in Nashville. The United States had just doubled in size under one man's leadership, yet that same man, President James K. Polk, lay dying from cholera, barely 3 months after leaving office. Polk had achieved what few presidents ever could. He expanded America's territory through the Mexican-American War, securing Texas, California, and the Pacific Coast. He fulfilled every campaign promise, but at a terrible cost to his health. Driven, obsessive, and tireless, he worked day and night through his 4-year term. When he finally stepped down, he was exhausted, his body weakened, his immune system shattered. Then came the cholera outbreak. Within weeks, the former president fell ill and never recovered. He was only 53. His wife, Sarah, lived for 42 more years, never remarrying, guarding his memory like a relic of a vanished era. Isn't it strange? The man who expanded a continent couldn't survive a single drop of bad water? Share your thoughts below. And now, from one U.S. president to another, a war hero who survived countless battles, only to lose his life to a summer illness no doctor could cure. Zachary Taylor, the soldier president who conquered Mexico but couldn't defeat cholera morbus.
Zachary Taylor, 1784 to 1850. July 1850, Washington, D.C. baked under a brutal summer sun. After a long day at Independence Day ceremonies, President Zachary Taylor returned to the White House overheated and exhausted. He cooled himself with cold milk and bowls of fresh cherries. But by nightfall, violent cramps and diarrhea struck. The doctors called it cholera morbus. Within 5 days, the hero of Mexico was dead. Taylor was a soldier first, president second, a man of discipline who had led troops through decades of war. His nickname, Old Rough and Ready, fit his rugged spirit. But in office, he was caught between North and South over the growing crisis of slavery. He stood for the Union above all, even if it made enemies in his own party. His sudden death shocked the nation. Conspiracy rumors spread. Some claimed he'd been poisoned. But decades later, modern testing confirmed the truth. No foul play, just contaminated food and water in the sweltering heat. Can you believe it? A man who survived bullets, deserts, and revolutions, felled by cherries and milk. Tell us your thoughts below. Next, we leave the battlefield and rise into the skies to meet a pioneer whose dreams gave humanity wings before disease brought him back to Earth. Wilbur Wright, the genius of flight, taken too soon by typhoid fever. Wilbur Wright, 1867–1912. May 1912, Dayton, Ohio. Wilbur Wright, the quiet genius who had taught humanity to fly, lay in bed, burning with fever. The diagnosis was typhoid, an infection from contaminated food or water. Within days, delirium set in. On May 30, at just 45, the world's first aviator was gone. With his brother Orville, Wilbur had achieved the impossible, the first powered flight in 1903. Together, they changed history, proving that human flight was no longer a dream. But their triumph led to endless lawsuits, patent wars, and exhaustion. Wilbur, always the calmer, more thoughtful brother, pushed himself relentlessly. By the time typhoid struck, his body was already worn down. When he died, Orville wrote simply, "A short life full of consequence." Flags flew at half-mast, and nations mourned the man who had opened the skies. Isn't it heartbreaking? The man who conquered gravity defeated by a glass of unclean water. Share your thoughts below. From the age of flight, we return to the world of art, to a painter whose light defined a generation, yet whose end came in the shadows of a deadly epidemic. J.M.W. Turner, the master of light, lost to cholera in Victorian London. J.M.W. Turner, 1775 to 1851. December 1851. London was cold, gray, and sickened by the cholera epidemic. In a modest Chelsea house, far from fame and fortune, J.M.W. Turner, England's greatest painter of light, took his final breath. He was 76. For decades, Turner had captured storms, sunlight, and the sea like no one before him, transforming British art with color, movement, and emotion. His works like The Fighting Temeraire and Rain, Steam, and Speed redefined what painting could be. But in his last years, he lived reclusively under another name.
weary of critics and society's gossip about his secret lover, Sophia Booth. When cholera struck London's polluted streets, even the rich were not safe. Turner's death shocked the art world. His final wish, that his fortune be used to support poor artists, a gift as luminous as his canvases. Imagine the irony, a man who painted the beauty of water, taken by water's poison. Tell us your thoughts below. Now we move from art to exile, to a dethroned king who lost his crown, his country, and finally his life to the same merciless disease. King Charles X of France, the last Bourbon monarch, dead in exile from cholera.
King Charles X of France, 1757 to 1836. November 1836, far from Paris, in the quiet town of Gorizia, King Charles X of France lay dying in exile. Once the proud ruler of France, he was now a frail old man struck by cholera, the same disease sweeping through Europe that year. Charles X had come to power after the fall of Napoleon, determined to restore the old ways, the divine right of kings, and the power of the church. But his stubbornness brought disaster. His reactionary rule sparked the July Revolution of 1830, forcing him to abdicate and flee. In exile, he watched his dynasty crumble and France move on without him. When the epidemic came, he faced it calmly, perhaps seeing it as the final punishment of fate. He died quietly at 79, the last Bourbon king to ever sit on France's throne. Do you think power blinds rulers until it's too late? Tell us your thoughts below. And now our final story, the tale of a man who breathed Africa's darkest paths for discovery and faith, only to fall to the same merciless disease. Dr. David Livingstone, the explorer whose courage outlived his broken body.
Dr. David Livingstone, 1813 to 1873. May 1873, deep in the swamps of Zambia, far from home, Dr. David Livingstone struggled to breathe. The legendary Scottish explorer and missionary, once hailed as the man who opened Africa to the world, was dying from dysentery and malaria. For 3 decades, Livingstone had journeyed through uncharted lands, mapping rivers, naming waterfalls, and fighting the brutal slave trade. His reports inspired explorers and abolitionists across Europe, yet his final years were marked by loneliness, exhaustion, and illness. Cut off from his country, he refused to give up. His African companions found him kneeling beside his bed, as if in prayer, already gone. They buried his heart under a tree in Africa and carried his body thousands of miles to the coast so he could rest in Britain. Today, he lies in Westminster Abbey, half a world away from the land he loved. Would you call this tragedy or devotion? Tell us in the comments below. But before we end, one final thought, because every story you've heard tonight shares a truth that echoes through history. Stay with us for the final message. 13 lives, 13 names carved into the story of our world. Kings and explorers, artists and visionaries. Each built legacies of power, beauty, or discovery, yet all met the same quiet, humbling end. Death by disease, born from the water they drank and the age they lived in. It reminds us that greatness doesn't grant immunity, not from pain, not from time, not from fate. From the battlefields of France to the deserts of Africa, from royal palaces to lonely ships at sea, these stories whisper the same truth. The smallest things can bring down the mightiest. Which of these stories moved you most? Tell us in the comments. We read every word. And if you believe that behind every legend lies a human story worth remembering, don't forget to subscribe to Tragic Hollywood for more unseen lives, untold endings,
and echoes of fame that time refused to silence, because even after centuries, their voices still speak. And through their deaths, we see how fragile and how unforgettable humanity truly is.